The engine's hum was the only sound slicing through the silence on Whisper Street. Michael adjusted his rearview mirror, his weary eyes catching the faint gleam of headlights in the thick fog that seemed to devour everything ahead. The digital clock on the dashboard flashed 11:45 p.m., the red numbers bleeding into the darkness. This was his final delivery before ending his midnight shift. A thought should have brought relief, only intensified the growing dread in his chest. 3 months ago, Michael had taken this job with NightShift Deliveries, a company that operated exclusively after sundown. The pay was tempting, nearly double what he earned in his previous daytime job. But there was a price to pay, beyond the deep-set dark circles and disrupted sleep patterns that now haunted him. The shadows under his eyes seemed to have a life of their own. Sometimes he saw them move in the mirror, as if they wanted to swallow his face, and when sleep came, it was filled with nightmares so vivid that he woke up screaming, the memories of nocturnal horrors clinging to his mind like sticky cobweb. NightShift had a peculiar rule, fine print clause in the contract that Michael only noticed too late. No employee could refuse a delivery, no matter the time or destination. And so, Michael found himself driving down the infamous Whisper Street on this chilly October night. A month that seemed to stretch infinitely, each night darker and longer than the last. The street was notorious for its macabre stories, urban legends whispered in dim bars and tense family gatherings. Decades ago, a cult was said to have performed bloody rituals in the abandoned houses lining the road. Children vanished, their bodies found weeks later, drained of blood and etched with strange symbols. Since then, the few remaining residents reported hearing whispers in the walls, childlike voices calling for help, and shadows moving at the corners of their vision, always just out of sight. Michael parked in front of number 666. A detail that twisted his stomach with apprehension. The house was a decrepit Victorian mansion, its blind windows like dead eyes staring at the street. Porch sagged and rotted, as if the house itself were bowing in a macabre reverence to visitors. Package on the passenger seat was small but unnaturally heavy. Michael could swear he sometimes felt it move, as if something inside were alive, and on certain nights when the silence was deepest, he thought he heard a whisper from within, words in a language he did not recognize, but that chilled his blood. With a resigned sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, Michael grabbed the box and approached the door. There was no doorbell, only a bronze knocker shaped like a gargoyle, its mouth open in a silent scream. He hesitated for a moment, his hand trembling as it neared the cold metal. When his fingers touched the knocker, he felt an electric shock run through his body, and for an instant, he had the impression that the gargoyle blinked at him. He knocked 3 times, and the sound echoed unnaturally through the silent house. Each knock seemed to reverberate not only through the structure, but through the very fabric of reality, as if announcing his arrival to something beyond this world. After what seemed like an eternity, the door creaked open, a high-pitched sound that made the hair on Michael's neck stand on end. An elderly woman, with wild white hair resembling albino serpents, stared at him with milky, opaque eyes. Her skin was pale and translucent, marked by dark veins that pulsed unnaturally. "Good evening, ma'am," Michael managed to say, his voice faltering. "I have a delivery for..." Checked the receipt, the letters seeming to writhe on the page. "Miss what, Morgana Kovacs?" The woman nodded slowly, a crooked smile forming on her thin lips, revealing yellowed, sharp teeth. "Ah, yes. My package has arrived. Come in, young man. I need you to place it in the basement." A deafening alarm sounded in Michael's mind. All his instructions, all his instincts screamed to never enter a customer's home. But NightShift's rule was clear, etched in his mind like a dark mantra: never refuse a request. And there was something else, compulsion that went beyond the fear of losing his job. It was as if the woman's voice had activated something within him, primal need to obey. With hesitant steps, Michael followed the woman inside. The interior was a labyrinth of dark hallways and dusty rooms. The smell of mold and something acrid, something reminiscent of rotting flesh and sulfur, made his stomach churn. The walls seemed to pulse around him, and he could swear he saw faces forming in the faded wallpaper, mouths opening in silent screams. They passed a series of closed doors, and Michael was certain he heard sounds coming from behind them. Scratching, muffled moans, and from one, the distinct cry of a child. He wanted to stop, to open the doors and investigate, but his feet kept moving as if they had a will of their own. Finally, they reached a metal door at the end of a corridor, seemed to stretch infinitely. The door was covered in strange symbols that appeared to move when Michael blinked, forming patterns that made his head ache trying to comprehend them. The woman opened it with a fluid gesture, revealing a staircase plunging into darkness deeper than Michael had ever seen. It was as if the darkness were a living entity, waiting to swallow him whole. "Go down, young man." The woman's voice was different now, deeper and resonant, as if other voices were speaking with her. "The altar? The table is just down there." Michael began his descent, his legs trembling so much he feared he would fall at any moment. Each step groaned under his weight, but it wasn't the sound of old wood. It was a human groan, pain and agony. He had a terrible certainty that he was stepping on bodies, the bodies of everyone who had gone down these stairs before him. The air grew denser with each step, laden with a metallic smell he recognized as blood. The darkness was almost tangible, pressing against his eyes and invading his mouth and nose. Felt he was suffocating, drowning in shadows. When he reached the bottom, Michael turned on his phone's flashlight with trembling fingers. The weak light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, illuminating only a small circle in front of him. But what he saw in that circle made his blood freeze in his veins. Basement was a perfect circle, so large that the walls were lost in the darkness beyond the light's reach. The walls were made of black, shiny stone that seemed to absorb the light, covered in carved symbols that bled a viscous, dark liquid. In the center was a stone table stained red, the veins in the rock forming patterns that resembled frozen screams. And around the table, hooded figures rose from the shadows, their faces hidden by grotesque masks that seemed made of stitched human flesh. There were dozens of them, forming a perfect circle around Michael. In unison, they began to chant in a low voice, in a language that made Michael's ears hurt trying to understand. "Welcome, Michael," said a familiar voice behind him. Michael turned slowly, his body moving like in a viscous nightmare. It was his boss from NightShift, but something was wrong with him. His eyes were completely black, and his skin seemed to be moving, as if something were crawling underneath it. "We've been waiting for you. Box, please." With trembling hands, Michael handed over the package. His boss opened it, revealing an ornate dagger. The blade was made of a black metal that seemed to swallow light, and the handle was adorned with what Michael recognized with horror as small human bones. "You know, Michael," his boss continued, his voice now a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once, "NightShift isn't just a delivery company. We're the guardians of an ancient secret, older than humanity itself. And every 100 years, we need a sacrifice to keep the doors between worlds closed." The hooded figures intensified their chant, their voices blending with the whispers now definitely coming from the walls. Michael saw with horror that the walls were moving, faces and hands forming in the stone, trying to break free. "You were chosen, Michael," boss continued, approaching with the dagger. "From the moment you signed the contract with your blood, you became part of this. Your soul already belongs to us. Now we just need your body to complete the ritual." Michael tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. He was paralyzed, watching helplessly as his boss raised the dagger. The hooded figures closed in, their hands reaching out to hold him. "Don't worry," the man whispered, his face now contorting into impossible shapes. "Your final delivery will be the most important of all. You will save the world, with your blood." The dagger descended, and Michael felt the cold blade pierce his chest. But the pain he expected did not come. Instead, he felt an intense cold spreading through his body, freezing his blood and paralyzing his muscles. The whispers turned into screams, thousands of agonizing voices echoing in his mind. Michael saw his life flash before his eyes, but it wasn't just his memories. He saw ancient cities submerged in oceans of blood, colossal creatures sleeping in the earth's depths, and portals to dimensions beyond human comprehension. As his consciousness faded, Michael understood the terrible truth behind NightShift. They weren't saving the world. They were feeding something far older and darker than anyone could imagine. Something that required sacrifices to remain dormant. Michael's vision blurred as his lifeblood seeped from the wound. The chanting grew louder, the room pulsating with an unholy energy. He could barely make out the figures around him, their forms flickering between human and something else. Something monstrous. His boss, now a grotesque amalgamation of human and eldritch horror, smiled down at him, the blackness in his eyes swallowing all light. "Your sacrifice is noted," he intoned. "Your soul will fuel the binding spell for another century." Michael's consciousness began to drift, cold of the dagger's wound spreading through his limbs. His senses dimmed, but his mind clung to a fragment of clarity. In his final moments, a burning question pushed through the fog of his fading mind. What was this ancient evil they were trying to contain? His question was answered by the darkness itself. A vision engulfed him, a vast, cosmic entity with tendrils that spanned galaxies, its very existence a contradiction of time and space, its eyes blacker than the void, locked onto his soul. He felt an overwhelming presence, an intelligence so ancient and malevolent that it defied comprehension. "You are but a speck, fleeting whisper," the entity's voice echoed in his mind. "Your world is mine, as are all worlds. These rituals delay the inevitable, but my return is assured. Ye serve only to prolong your suffering." As the last spark of life left Michael, the vision faded, replaced by the mundane reality of the basement. The chanting had ceased, the hooded figures dispersing into the shadows. His body, lifeless and cold, lay upon the altar, a testament to the horror that had transpired. The next morning, Whisper Street was eerily quiet. The fog had lifted, revealing the decrepit houses in all their dilapidated glory. Number 666 stood as it always had, an ominous sentinel over the cursed street. A new driver, fresh-faced and unaware, was handed the keys to Michael's van at NightShift Deliveries. The manager, now in a perfectly human guise, offered a welcoming smile. "Welcome to NightShift," said, his eyes twinkling with a hidden malevolence. "We have just one rule: never refuse a delivery." The new driver nodded, eager to start. As he drove off into the night, the shadows seemed to follow him, whispering secrets and promises of things better left unknown. And in the basement of 666 Whisper Street, the altar lay silent, waiting for the next sacrifice. The ancient evil slumbered once more, its hunger temporarily sated, but its eyes always watching, always waiting. For the night would come again, and with it, another soul would be drawn into the darkness, ensuring the cycle of terror continued unabated.